Welcome back. What is more amazing, discovery of a 7,000-year-old Native American burial ground, or the fact because of sea level rise, that's climate change, folks, the burial ground was discovered 300 feet off of Minnesota Key under 20 feet of water. It is truly an amazing find, a submerged burial ground, preserved human remains. How did that happen? What can we learn, and what do we do to make sure it is preserved? Joining us for more, John McCarthy, Executive Director of the historic Spanish Point, John Thaxton of the Gulf Coast Community Foundation, and ABC 7 reporter Christopher Brantley. Gentlemen, as I said, this is so fascinating for so many different reasons. John, when you first heard about this and you saw really the preliminary reports of what is out there, what were your questions in terms of what we can learn from it?
Well, I think that when you look at Sarasota County in this region, you see a whole constellation of prehistoric sites, and this one is kind of filling in a gap. You've got Little Salt Spring at 12,000 years before present, War Mineral at 10,000. You've got places like historic Spanish Point with shell middens that are 5,000 years old. And here you have this 7,000-year-old site submerged in the Gulf of Mexico, which is reflective of some of the other sites that have been found around the state of Florida, but never before in the marine environment.
If you could explain, and I know that per se you're not a scientist to this degree, but how was it preserved? From my understanding, the humans who were buried were buried at the bottom of freshwater ponds in peat, and in a way that preserved them. And I mean, is there anything that we don't understand about that, or is that a common or uncommon way people of that era dealt with human remains?
There are 4 or 5 other sites in Florida where these similar type of interments have been found in a freshwater environment. Some in a bayhead swamp, some in a cypress swamp. Some in what was called a muck pond, and these occurred outside of Zolfo Springs, down in Naples, also on the east coast near Titusville, and then in Little Salt Slough, adjacent to Little Salt Spring here in Sarasota in a marsh. And so when you have this organic peat that is building up over a long period of time, it becomes somewhat anaerobic, and therefore the bacteria are not breaking down the organic materials the way you would expect them to, and indeed they preserve them. I think what's remarkable about this site is it wasn't just preserved once, it was essentially preserved twice. Preserved originally by the peat, but then also covered with sand as sea level rose, and preserved again another time, and then sealed away until some wave action has exposed it to modern day.
John, this is unique from so many different perspectives, and here you have a historic scientific site that is off our beaches, and the state really has to engage an organization like yours to help the public understand what's out there, why it's important, and why it needs to be protected.
Yeah, we were actually honored when Secretary Dentzer called our office to engage the Gulf Coast Community Foundation and not only preserving the site, but educating the public as to its value. One of the core principles of Gulf Coast is to build this sense of place, this sense of meaning in what we call Sarasota County, and to have an example of citizens living and engaging in social activities 7,200 plus years ago in Sarasota County is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to engage the entire community in recognizing just what a special place this is.
And Christopher, aside from the historic and the scientific issues here, you're also dealing with an ancient, Native American burial ground, and whenever that comes up throughout the country, that raises a whole lot of other sensitive issues.
It does, absolutely, because we have to remember these are human remains. And there are folks, the Seminole tribe, just a little south of us, is headquartered. They want to make sure that all of this is handled very carefully, that it's handled with respect. We have to remember that is a gravesite.
All right, and we will get into that more in our next segment. We are just getting warmed up. We'll have much more on the ancient burial ground right after we check the first alert weather. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're talking about what we can learn from an ancient burial ground off of the Florida coast. Joining us for more are John McCarthy, Executive Director of Historic Spanish Point, John Thaxton of the Gulf Coast Community Foundation, and ABC 7 reporter Christopher Brantley. John, what can we learn from this ancient burial ground? What kind of answers are contained within the material out there?
Well, I think one of the things that really resonates with the community, especially the folks in Inglewood and Manasota Key, they've found fossils for years that represent things that are 10 million years old, like the shark's teeth. But they've also found fossils of bison and horse and all these Pleistocene animals that were here from 10 to 20,000 years ago. Well, now you have these human remains offshore, and so it causes you to really think about where we boat and fish and swim used to be dry ground. And there was woods and fields and creeks and marshes and so I think that people are fascinated by not just the burials themselves, but this prehistoric environment that existed out on that shelf. And it's all covered by sand. And so it's very similar to the habitats that we have in the undeveloped parts of our community, but it was all, it's now all underwater. And so it makes you wonder how many other sites are underwater, how many other prehistoric sites are out there that just haven't been discovered.
Well, it also raises one of the more thornier issues of our times, and that is sea level rise and climate change, because as we mentioned at the outset, this is a burial site that used to be on land but is now in salt water, and that says a lot about how the sea level around Florida has changed over these thousands of years. And I would imagine, John, even within this amazing discovery, there is a renewed debate about sea level rise in Florida and how it does threaten the state.
Well, I don't think there could be too much debate on whether or not there's sea level rise in the state of Florida. I think the only debate would be limited to whether or not man contributes to the acceleration or deceleration of sea level rise. Just as we know that this site was well inland of the coast 7,000 plus years ago, we also know that the place that we're sitting right here today in this studio was once 15 or 20 feet underwater, and the dry land was in the archipelago of what is now known as the Lake Wales Ridge. So there's clearly been dramatic changes in sea level rise, and the impact is magnified in such a flatland such as we see in the state of Florida. So clearly this site was in freshwater. We know that because of the detritus that created the peat composite that the material was found in. And we can also look to other very telling tales that things were much different 7,000 years ago than what they were today in terms of the natural environment and the location of our coastline.
Christopher, one of the things, and you referenced this in your story, that we've known about the existence of this site well before it was made public, but we agreed to not report it while the state worked to make the site secure. What do you mean in terms of making the site secure? The Coast Guard's not out there patrolling the perimeter.
No, absolutely not. But the thing is, they did not have any, there wasn't as much public awareness. The folks who live off the coast, because there are homes there, they didn't have a whole lot of knowledge of it at the time when we first found out about it. There are now, as I'm told, security cameras that have been put in place to keep the area secure. Local law enforcement is now aware and keeping an eye out for anything that seems strange. If you have a dive operation, as I understand it, it's not a small operation. Your boat has to stay there for a little while. You have to kind of stay anchored about. Residents nearby can see that and can call in if something is strange.
John, is the state or the people who are investigating this concerned about the continued security of the site? I mean, I know that cameras have been put up, but it's impossible to guard the site with personnel 24/7. Has anybody tried to do anything malicious?
Well, the site has been compromised once since it has been discovered.
In what way?
There were individuals that dove on the site, and there's clear evidence of excavation where material was almost certainly removed, and likely some of that material could have been human remains, which is a clear violation of state statute, not to mention the fact that it's just morally corruptible.
We have a lot of folks who go diving for shark's teeth. I mean, that's how this was found.
Yes.
Is it possible that someone was diving for shark's teeth, or do you imagine that it's a coincidence that could not have happened? Somebody had to have known.
It is possible that that is the circumstances, but the people who were at the site were questioned, and it's pretty clear that that's not what happened.
Any criminal charges pending out there?
No, it's very difficult to prosecute these types of infractions, and you need pretty clear and compelling evidence.
So what are we doing in terms of contacting Native American tribes in terms of having them partner in terms of dealing with the human remains and the site in the most respectful way? What happens in the future? I mean, do we remove any possible human remains and any artifacts that were found there and preserve them, on shore, or do we somehow allow this to stay exactly where it is?
Before, I'm going to just interrupt John, because I just want to put in a plug for the Seminole Tribe. They were engaged early on in this process, and they have been just remarkable partners. We could not have gotten to where we are today without their cooperation. So let John, you answer the question directly.
With both burial sites as well as archaeological sites, it's never the state's goal to go in and dig it up. Oftentimes these sites are found during a construction project or found by accident. So they involve doing salvage operations to learn what they can from what's already been disturbed. When you have sites on state-owned land, for instance, the process is to basically leave them intact. This one's a little different, of course, because being submerged, it is being changed by the currents of the Gulf and the sand and that sort of thing, probably on a daily basis. So there has been conversation. There's no intent to remove the burials. The intent is to understand the extent of the pond, to better understand that environment, to understand how big it is and the significance of it. And then, again, working with the Seminole Tribe representatives to find the most respectful way to preserve it.
Right, so does that mean because, the ocean is changing, the shores are changing, what's in, our oceans are changing, that inevitably what is out there in terms of the burial ground is going to go away at some point?
Well, or be covered up by sand again. And so it's been covered up by sand. It's now been, a portion of it has been uncovered. So it could be covered up again by sand, or greater parts of it could be uncovered. And those are natural processes. And so that's not as bad as someone going out and deliberately, disturbing the site. If natural processes are going to take their course, that's going to happen, and it's not preventable.
John, is the Gulf Coast Community Foundation working on a way to memorialize what is there and educate our local residents and the public in general what is there?
Ours is not so much to memorialize, but clearly to educate and to instruct the community on just how significant and important a global site that this is. We leave it up to the experts, such as the archaeologists and Secretary Detzer's office and others, to do the work. Our role is to engage the community and just, to let the people of the South County, and for that matter the region, just know how important this is.
Okay, we will have to leave it there. But before we go, we want to share with you what some of you had to say about last night's show on the city of Sarasota suing the drug companies. The Suncoast has some of the highest rates of opioid abuse per capita in the country. That may be why the city of Sarasota has filed suit against the makers and sellers of opioid-based drugs. We went to Facebook to hear your thoughts. Mallory says, ridiculous. A manufacturer is not responsible for misuse and/or abuse of the product by the consumer. If the manufacturer advertised and sold directly to the consumers, that would be a different situation. As it stands now, there are 3 to 5 steps between the manufacturer and the consumer, and the manufacturer does not control those steps. Kathy says, absolutely justified. You can't convince me that they have been unaware of the massive overuse and pill mills, funds towards treatment, rescue, and law enforcement. And John says, don't the folks that prescribe the medications have some responsibility too? Well, if you'd like to join the conversation on tonight's topic, just visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/mysuncoast.com.abc7. And FYI, you can watch past discussions on demand. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. And for the latest on local breaking news, don't forget to download the updated version of our app. If your current app doesn't work, it's expired, just go to the App Store and re-download it by searching for WWSB or My Suncoast. We want to thank all our guests for being here tonight. John McCarthy, Executive Director of Historic Spanish Point, John Thaxton of the Gulf Coast Community Foundation, and ABC7 reporter Christopher Brantley.